300 years ago, she was born and raised in the city under the protection of the church, far from the dangers of intrusion. She lived a happy life until the plague destroyed everything. Her grandfather fell ill, and residents began piling up lifeless bodies by the lake. People were dying before they could be buried. She was desperate to save everyone. Instead of becoming a savior, she ended up becoming a dark witch. She was unable to heal the dying patients, as she could only summon spirits to allow the living to say goodbye to their loved ones. While she was helping people, the church father appeared with 2 knights carrying chains and ordered them to capture her, as he believed she was the one who had brought this disaster. The knights tied her hands with iron chains and began dragging her body under the church's orders, as the church father thought she had harmed the village. She didn't know why these people were treating her this way. If she had been the person who had allowed the spirits to say their final goodbyes to their families. She was thrown into the lake, and due to the weight of the iron chains, she began sinking towards the bottom of the lake, causing the air in her lungs to gradually run out. All she wanted was to save them all, even though all she had been able to do was help the spirits say goodbye. While she was sinking in the lake, she began to wonder why the church was doing this if she hadn't done anything wrong. Lu Fan approached Xiao Yi, and while staring into her eyes, he began to caress her. Sun Ji and the others were left speechless, and while they were staring at Lu Fan, they started wondering how someone like Lu Fan could summon such a powerful dragon. Upon seeing the black dragon, Xiao Jia told everyone that they could now leave the secret realm. Lu Fan began to stare at the lake, and upon seeing bubbles emerging from the water, and realizing that the portal had not appeared, he revealed to the others that the boss was still alive. He told Xiao Jia that it was still too early to leave. Gradually, more bubbles started to emerge from the bottom of the lake, and slowly, the figure of the boss became visible. Until several seconds later, the boss of the secret realm shot out of the water into the sky. Lu Fan and Xiao Yi began to look up at the sky and wondered why the water had suddenly shot up into the air. The boss's body was surrounded by water. It extended his hands to both sides, causing the water to slowly start swirling around its body. Upon seeing this, Sun Ji began unsheathing his sword, and quickly everyone else assumed an offensive stance and prepared for battle. While Xiao Yi was staring up at the sky, she used one of her wings and covered everyone to protect them from a possible attack. At that moment, beneath the body of the Secret Kingdom's boss, a giant woman made of water appeared. She began to stare intensely at Lu Fan and the others with a murderous look. A status window appeared in front of everyone, revealing that this boss was called Duel's Resentment, and was in the second stage. It was level 25, and the difficulty of the boss had drastically increased from difficult to nightmare level. Its strength increased from 271 points to 286, its agility from 183 to 249, its spirit from 150 to 435, and its endurance increased from 266 to 399. The boss had several abilities. The first ability was called Lamentation Impact, which allowed it to release a curse of resentment. This ability caused the probability of instantly killing the target to decrease drastically. If the boss didn't activate instant death, then it could inflict great damage and potentially add effects such as body poison, bleeding, and stun. The second ability was called Deep Aquatic Pressure. This ability allowed the boss to manipulate the water from the lake to form a prison that would enable it to trap his targets. The third ability was called Body of Resentments. This ability allowed the boss to become immune to all physical damage. The fourth and final ability was called Will of Resentment. This ability allowed it to unleash an explosion of resentment that would awaken all the corpses in the secret realm. Upon reading the information displayed on the statistics window, Sun Ji unsheathed his sword and assumed an offensive stance. On the other hand, Xiao Jia and Qin Ku began to get scared. Miss Kai took out her dagger, and while staring fixedly at the boss, she started trembling and revealed to everyone that the boss was transitioning to the next phase. The boss extended its hands towards the sky and exploded in rage. It ordered Lu Fan and others not to think about escaping. The boss used a skill called Deep Aquatic Pressure, causing the giant woman made of water to throw giant water balls at them. Just before the giant water balls could reach Lu Fan, Xiao Yi used the immunity skill called Restriction and blocked the attack using one of her wings. Lu Fan was shocked to see this, and a system window appeared to inform him that the skill called Black Dragon Lineage had been activated. This skill reduced all damage by 50% and made her immune to all harmful effects. Additionally, her self-recovery ability increased by 500%. One of the water balls thrown by the boss fell near Miss Kai. Luckily, she reacted in time and jumped away from the area. But at that moment, the water started advancing towards her at high speed, and in a blink of an eye, it began creating a prison around her body. Upon seeing this, Kin-Kyu began to wonder what was happening. Miss Kai started attacking the water with her dagger, but no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to do any damage because the boss had activated a skill called Resentment Body that made it immune to all physical attacks. While she was striking the water with her dagger, Sun-Ji stared at it and started wondering what was happening. Several minutes passed and she continued attacking, but upon realizing that her attacks were having no effect, she gave up. She closed her eyes and apologized to Kin-Kyu as she thought her death was near. Upon hearing this, Kin-Kyu approached her and while staring into her eyes, she explained that she should be the one apologizing. She fell to the ground, with one hand holding onto the magic staff and the other supporting herself on the floor. With a lost look in her eyes, she looked down at the ground and explained to Miss CIA that all of this was because of her insistence on coming to this secret realm. She also added that now everyone was trapped here because of her and they would never be able to leave. Lu Fan turned around, put a hand on his waist, and while looking at Xiaoyi's wing, he asked Kin-Kyu if she was going to give up now that they had come this far. Another ball of water fell near Sun-Ji and in the blink of an eye surrounded his body, forming a prison made of water around him. Kin-Kyu stared into his eyes and explained that she was the only person in the group who could attack with magic. She also added that with the little damage she inflicted, it wouldn't be enough to defeat the boss. While Sun-Ji was holding the sword with both hands, he looked at the boss and explained to her that because the boss was immune to all physical damage, they couldn't even protect themselves. He asked Lu Fan if he could attack the boss with magic. At that moment, the boss activated a skill called Lamentation Impact. The giant woman made of water began reaching out towards Lu Fan. Seeing this, Xiaoyi used one of her wings and placed it in front of him to protect him from the attack. She clenched her teeth tightly and stared into Lu Fan's eyes to warn him that they were in danger. Lu Fan explained to Sun-Ji that he couldn't attack the boss with magic. Just before the attack could hit him, Xiaoyi released a strong breath towards the direction of the attack, preventing Lu Fan from receiving it. A system window appeared to inform Lu Feng that the immunity effect of the Black Dragon had been applied to instant death, corpse poison, bleeding, and stun. Lu Fan simply put his hands in his pockets and remained silent. Then another window of the system appeared to inform him that the Black Dragon lineage had caused all damage received to be reduced by 50%, making her immune to any harmful effects, and also increasing her self-recovery ability by 500%. He stared into the boss's eyes and with a smile, he revealed to Sun-Ji that he couldn't attack using magic, but his dragon pet could. Upon hearing this, everyone started looking at him with surprised eyes. Miss Kai was left speechless and referred to him as Dragon Tamer, explaining that the difference between him and the boss was too great. Taking advantage of their distracted conversation, the boss quickly moved its hand towards Lu Fan with the intention of attacking him by surprise. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan clenched his fist tightly, causing a fireball to appear in the palm of his hand. His eyes were emitting flames as he stared directly into the boss's eyes. He reassured Miss Kai not to worry, as the attributes of a dragon could not be compared to those of a human. As the boss slowly brought the water woman's hand closer to Lu Fan, it activated the skill called Lamentation Impact once again. The attack hit Xiaoyi, but once again a system window appeared informing Lu Fan that the Black Dragon's immunity effect had been applied against instant death, corpse poison, bleeding, and stun. And once again, another system window appeared to inform him that the Black Dragon lineage had been activated, causing all damage received to be reduced by 50%, making her immune to any harmful effects. Additionally, her self-recovery ability increased by 500%. While Lu Fan's body was surrounded by a fire aura, Xiaoyi's statistics dramatically increased. Her strength went from 968 points to 1258, agility went from 767 to 997, spirit went from 959 to 1246, and endurance went from 976 to 1268 points. He activated the skill called Dragon Inspiration, which allowed him and the dragon pet to inspire themselves. Once this skill was activated, it caused all attributes and attack power of the dragon to increase by 30%. He pointed his finger at the boss and while staring into its eyes, he gave Xiaoyi the order to use the Lava Blaze ability. She opened her mouth and began to expel a strong burst of fire towards the direction of the boss. In a matter of seconds, the burst of fire reached the body of the boss and slowly started to burn it. The Lava Blaze ability allowed the dragon to continuously emit flames forward, causing damage while healing itself. Xiaoyi's power was so great that in a matter of seconds, the entire sky was filled with flames of fire, gradually causing the body of the boss to disintegrate. Kin-Q stood up, approached the edge of the lake, and upon seeing the incredible power of the dragon, she was left speechless. Xiaojia also approached the edge of the lake and while staring into the sky, explained to everyone that everything was over since the boss was completely destroyed. Due to the intense heat of the flames, little by little, the water prison began to evaporate. And upon seeing this, Miss CIA was left speechless. While Suji stared into the sky, he revealed to everyone that this power was simply that of a calamity. In a matter of seconds, the body of the boss from the secret realm began to break apart from within, due to the intense heat of Xiaoyi's flames. Several seconds later, the boss's body started to explode, causing a wave of flames to spread in all directions. At that moment, the boss used a skill called Resentment Will, which allowed it to release bursts of resentment that would awake all the corpses in the secret realm. Gradually, the body of the giant woman made of water began to disintegrate, creating a purple smoke curtain. Several seconds later, the boss's body completely disintegrated and transformed into a portal, and a chest appeared on the ground. Xiaoyi returned to her human form and while flying in the air, she stared up at the sky and smiled. The level of the Black Dragon realm increased but the system still decided not to reveal it. Lu Fan put his hands in his pockets and while looking at Xiaoyi, he smiled and congratulated her for doing a good job. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that his level had increased to 5. The boss's body exploded and a curtain of smoke spread everywhere. Kin-Q quickly approached Miss Kai to see if she was okay. Sun Ji smiled and while looking at the boss, he saw the portal and told the others that it was all over. Xiaojia stood up and while coughing due to the smoke, asked Miss Kai if she was okay. At that moment, Xiaojia and Sun Ji heard a sound. Quickly both turned around and were shocked. Behind them appeared the village zombies, who had been resurrected thanks to the boss's ability. Little by little, the zombies began to approach them. At that moment, Sun Ji looked up and was surprised to see Xiaoyi. He started wondering what was happening. She started moving quickly towards the zombies, opened her mouth, and activated the lava blaze ability. She flew over the zombies and began to unleash a burst of fire from her mouth, causing the zombies to slowly disintegrate. Sun Ji raised his head and while looking at Xiaoyi, he was left speechless and asked Kin-Q if she was the giant dragon. Kin-Q also started looking up at the sky, and upon seeing how Xiaoyi was effortlessly dealing with the zombies, she was left speechless. She couldn't believe that she was finishing off the zombies that had been so difficult for them to defeat with such ease. Lu Fan approached Kin-Q and with a smile explained to her that Xiaoyi was the Black Dragon. He also added that she was able to deal with those minions as if it were a game. While Kin-Q was watching Xiaoyi annihilate all the zombies, Lu Fan turned around and while looking into Sun Ji's eyes, smiled and asked Kin-Q not to get so tense since the boss was being taken care of. He also added that after distributing the rewards, they could prepare to leave. As he approached the chest, he smiled and explained to them that following the rules, he would choose first. After saying this, he asked if anyone had any objections. Kin-Q replied no and also asked why he thought someone would have an objection. Lu Fan approached the chest, got down on his knees, and opened it. The chest began to glow, and as he stared inside, he started to smile. While Kin-Q held the magical staff with both hands, she began to approach Lu Fan. On the other side, the others simply stood silently watching. This chest contained several objects. The first one was the Divine Light Scepter. This object was of good quality, with 32 spirit points and 19 resistance points. The required level to use it was level 10. The scepter had an ability called Sacred Light Seal, which allowed the user to link the target with light. The duration of the link depended on the user's spiritual attributes. The second object was an outfit called Nightfall. This object was of good quality. It had 35 spirit points, 15 resistance points, and the required level to use it was level 10. This outfit had an ability called Light Current, which allowed the user to use light to create a barrier to protect themselves from attacks. The amount of damage that the barrier could absorb depended on the user's mental attributes. The third object was the Morning Ring. This object was of rare quality. It had 57 spirit points, 21 resistance points, and 12 strength points. The required level to use it was 15. This ring had an ability called Morning Aura that allowed the user to assign any target to obtain the Morning Aura. Any attack launched by the person with the aura would be added with a resentment value. When the resentment value accumulated, the attacking target would be affected by negative effects such as poisoning, bleeding, and dizziness caused by corpses. The fourth object was the Job Transfer Scroll. This object was of rare quality, and it had no points as it was a consumable. The effect of this object was to induce a low probability that a non-hidden profession would be transferred to the hidden profession of the current profession. Without thinking twice, Lu Fan chose the job transfer scroll. He stood up, and while holding it in his hand, he turned his head towards Kin Q and the others. As his body emitted a blue energy, he revealed to them that he was going to choose the scroll. A system window appeared to inform him that he had successfully obtained the job transfer scroll. Kin Q approached Lu Fan, and while holding the magical staff with one hand, with the other she began indicating to him that he shouldn't give the rest of the objects to them so deliberately since, after all, according to the rules, all the objects inside the chest belonged to him. While he was holding the scroll in one hand, he extended his other hand towards her, and while looking into her eyes, he explained that he wasn't pretending to be a knight since, after all, the spiritual equipment was more suitable for her. He also added that all he needed was this job transfer scroll. Kin Q approached the chest, crouched down, and while looking inside, she explained to him that if she hadn't met him, then all of them could have died in this place. Lu Fan put his hands on his waist and simply stood still, silently watching without saying a word, wondering what she was planning to do. Several seconds later, while Kin Q was leaning on the ground with the help of her magic staff, she took out the morning ring from the chest. She extended her hand towards Lu Fan, and while looking into his eyes, she asked him to please accept this ring. Without thinking twice, Lu Fan grabbed the ring, and while he was holding it in his hand, he closed his eyes and with a smile thought that if she acted this way, then he couldn't do anything. Kin Q stood up, and while holding the magic staff, she started staring into Lu Fan's eyes and began to blush. She started wondering what else he hadn't shown. To her, he was a very difficult person to figure out. While Xiaojia was playing with Xiaoyi, Sunji approached them, and while looking at Lu Fan thought that he was a very interesting person. This Kai also approached them, and while looking at Lu Fan, she smiled and explained to Kin Q that it was time to prepare to return. That same night, several hours later, Lu Fan returned to his Aunt Han Ki's bun shop. She threw herself into his arms, closed her eyes, and explained that this was too dangerous because just by listening to him, she started getting scared since he had encountered so many dangers in the past few days. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan became somewhat confused. While he was staring into Han Ki's eyes, he asked her what had happened. He also requested that she release him quickly since he had been in the wilderness for several days and his clothes were very dirty. Instead of letting go, Han Ki hugged him even tighter, closed her eyes, and while crying, explained to him that Lu Fan wasn't dirty at all. She also added that because he had left without informing her, she hadn't been able to close her eyes during the past nights out of fear that once she woke up from sleep, her beloved Lu Fan wouldn't have returned home. Lu Fan closed his eyes, approached her, placed a hand on her back, and with a pleasant smile, apologized for leaving without warning. He also asked her not to worry because he would never let her worry again. While he was wiping Han Ki's tears away with his hand, he closed his eyes and explained with a smile that everything was fine. He also asked her to stop crying. Upon hearing this, she stopped crying and thought that Lu Fan was a very good person. Then she turned to one side and began stroking the head of the dragon Xiaoyi, who sat on the floor, closed her eyes, and started smiling because she was enjoying it a lot. While she was looking at Xiaoyi, she explained to Lu Fan that she had been very surprised when she first saw her. She also added that such a cute girl like her was truly an extremely powerful dragon. Lu Fan simply put a hand on his hip and while looking at Xiaoyi, smiled and remained silent without saying a word. Han Ki approached Xiaoyi, slightly bending his body towards her, and while looking into her eyes, she thought that she must not have eaten enough in the past few days, so she asked her if she was hungry. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi started to look into her eyes and began nodding to indicate that yes, she was hungry. While the two of them were talking, Lu Fan approached them and while holding the job transfer scroll in his hand, looked at Han Ki and explained that this was the reward from the dungeon that he had specifically chosen for his aunt. He began to bring the job transfer scroll closer to her and while looking into her eyes, he explained that if she changed from one job to a hidden job, then she would no longer have to keep watching this bakery. Han Ki stood up and while looking into his eyes, she explained that she couldn't use the job transfer scroll because it was too expensive. She advised him to simply sell it since, as he had told her, he had left the weapons and equipment with the elder lady of the Qin family. She also asked him to sell this scroll to buy equipment, so that his results would be the best during the big exam. Just before she could finish speaking, Lu Fan took out his mobile phone and showed her the balance he had in his bank account. He closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile, he explained to her that he no longer lacked money or equipment. Seeing that Lu Fan had so much money in his bank account, she was amazed. He approached her and while looking into her eyes, He began to smile and explained to her that he had sold many of the materials he had collected during this trip. He also added that his travel companion Kin Q had promised him a reward of 100,000 yuan. After explaining this to her, he asked his aunt to believe his words as they would never have to worry about money again. Upon hearing this, Han Ki approached him, clenched her fist, and while looking into his eyes, couldn't help but shed tears. Lu Fan began to bring the job transfer scroll closer to her, and while looking into her eyes, he smiled and explained that it was better to use it now. She simply extended her hands towards the scroll, and while looking at Lu Fan with a happy expression, she thought he was right. She opened the scroll, and it started to shine, while her body emitted a blue energy. Her hair and dress began to float, leaving her surprised. Lu Fan simply covered his face with his hand and started to smile. Several seconds later, slowly the scroll began to disappear and she was teleported to the system space. While Lu Fan was covering his face with his hand, he looked at Han Ki and asked if she had been successful. While her body was surrounded by blue energy, she slightly turned her head to the side, and while looking at her hand, she explained to Lu Fan that she had succeeded as she had obtained the best hidden profession of a chef called Enchanted Cook. A system window appeared in front of him to inform him that Han Ki had obtained the hidden profession of an enchanted cook. Lu Fan was somewhat surprised and asked her if there was anything special about this new hidden profession. She explained to him that she had a skill called enchanted cooking that allowed her to prepare food with various buffs. Lu Fan praised her, telling her that her aunt's craftsmanship was very good, so the additional attributes were going to be very high. Upon hearing this, she started smiling and explained that he was just speaking highly of her. Lu Fan decided to change the subject and asked her where Xiao Yi had gone. Xiao Yi had taken advantage of the fact that the two of them were talking to go to the kitchen and eat all the food. After filling her stomach, she lay down on the floor and fell asleep. That same night in the study room of Qin's family villa, Qin Q went to her father's office and sat on a sofa. While her father was holding a glass in his hand, he turned towards her and asked if it had really been a dragon master named Lu Fan who had summoned a powerful black dragon that saved their lives. Qin Q closed her eyes and explained to him that her stubbornness had almost cost them all their lives. She also revealed to him that Lu Fan was too strong, despite both of them having hidden professions. The difference between her and him was like that between a firefly and the moon. While her father was swirling his wine glass, he started looking outside through the window and asked her if she had told anyone else about the dragon. She turned her head towards her father and replied that she hadn't because she had made an agreement with Lu Fan when they both returned, that the matter regarding the dragon would not be revealed by the Qin family. The name of her father was Qin Shanhai. He slightly turned his head towards her and praised her for doing a good job. He also asked her how many of those people who coveted the power of the dragons would remain calm once this information was leaked. Qin Q stood up, and while staring into her father's eyes, she clenched her fist tightly and begged him not to leak the information since Lu Fan had saved all their lives. She placed a hand on her chest and asked him if he had anything against Lu Fan's dragon. Qin Shanhai closed his eyes and started laughing out loud. He asked his daughter if she believed that her father was that kind of person. He also asked her how she was going to pay Lu Fan for saving their lives. Upon hearing this, Qin Q felt quite relieved. She closed her eyes and explained to her father that when she had invited Lu Fan to join the team, she had promised him a reward of 100,000 yuan. Qin Shanhai sighed, closed his eyes, and asked her to take a Bohemia card and personally go to Lu Fan's door the next day to thank him. She simply closed her eyes and nodded, then opened her eyes, and while staring into his eyes, she asked her father why he didn't come with her if he was so curious about Lu Fan. Qin Shanhai sighed, put a hand under his chin. The other rested on the arm of the chair, closed one eye, and explained to her that he also wanted to meet that dragon master but couldn't go because he had important matters to attend to tomorrow morning. Early in the morning of the next day, the princess of Taiki Kingdom came from the Dragon Kingdom to study in Zhonghai City. The princess was a short girl who carried a magic staff and was being accompanied by her assistant, a tall man with black hair wearing black armor, a magic wand, and carrying a suitcase. They often had business dealings, so they still had to greet them. But coming here when the big exam was about to take place wasn't for studying abroad. The princess and her assistant arrived at Han Ki's bakery. While she was preparing the pastries, she noticed that she had customers. She turned her head towards them and asked them to wait for a moment. Several seconds later, she slightly opened the door, closed her eyes, and with a smile explained to them that there were no steamed buns today. The princess placed a hand on her waist, turned her head slightly to the side, and while looking into her assistant's eyes, asked if this was the place they were looking for. She also asked if he had brought her to a garbage dump. Upon hearing this, the man closed his eyes, lowered his head slightly, and explained that he would never dare to do such a thing. He also added that according to their investigation, this was indeed the place they were looking for. The man forcefully knocked on the door of the bakery, causing the edge of the door to hit Han-ki and making her fly out in the process. Both entered the store and the princess turned her head towards her and explained that she was here to find someone. She asked if she knew a dragon master named Lu Fan. Upon hearing the noise, Lu Fan started coming down the stairs. He looked towards the door and while having one hand resting on the stairs, he asked his aunt if someone was looking for him. Han-ki stood up, closed one eye, clenched her teeth, and with one hand began to hold onto the part of her arm where she had been hit by the door. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan panicked and asked her if she was okay. While the princess covered her nose, she turned her body towards the man and told him that this place was filled with an unpleasant smell. Quickly, Lu Fan approached Han-ki and while holding her hand, looked into her eyes and asked if she was okay. He also asked what was happening. She closed her eyes and with a pleasant smile, she explained to him that she was fine. While they were talking, the princess caught his attention and asked him if he was Lu Fan. She explained that she herself, the princess, had made a special trip to see him out of honor. Lu Fan turned his head towards her and while looking into her eyes, he asked who she was and why she was looking for him. The man extended his hand towards her and explained to Lu Fan that she was Princess Jinju from the Taiki Kingdom, and he introduced himself as Chui Hongtai, the princess's assistant. Jinju put a hand on her hip and while holding the magical staff with the other, she stared into Lu Fan's eyes and with a smile explained that she had come here to give him the opportunity to move forward. While holding on to Han-ki, Lu Fan looked at them and asked the princess what she meant by move forward. While Jinju was looking into Lu Fan's eyes, she asked him if it was uncomfortable to become a dragon master. Then she reached out her hand towards Chui Hongtai. Upon seeing this, he closed his eyes and nodded. He crouched down on the ground and opened the suitcase. Upon seeing what the suitcase contained, Lu Fan was surprised and started sweating. It didn't take long for him to realize that it was a dragon egg. Princess Jinju told him that as long as he accepted the request, the dragon egg would be all his. Upon seeing Lu Fan's expression, she pointed at him with her finger and while staring into his eyes, she explained to him that the conditions were very simple. She wanted him to be her slave and do everything she told him without disobeying. While Chui Hongtai was holding the dragon egg in both hands, he bowed his head and closed his eyes. Princess Jinju turned around, placed one hand on her waist, and while holding the magical staff with the other hand, she closed her eyes and explained to Lu Fan that the Abyss Fragment dungeon had been cleared. While Han-ki had her hands resting on Lu Fan's chest, they both turned towards Jinju, and he asked her what she meant by him being her slave. Princess Jinju turned around and upon seeing that Lu Fan was speechless, she mocked him by saying it was understandable for a non-existent guy like him to be scared when seeing such a powerful dragon egg. Lu Fan activated the system, causing a statistics window about the dragon egg to appear. This egg was an Ankylosaurus egg. Its level was unknown. It had 32 points of strength, 67 points of agility, 35 points of spirit, and 133 points of resistance. This egg had two abilities. The first one was called Hard Shell. The Ankylosaurus naturally had a tough outer covering that reduced any damage received by 10%. The second ability was called Sweeping Strike. This ability allowed the Ankylosaurus to swing its tail and inflict damage on targets within a fan-shaped area. Upon reading this information, Lu Fan quickly came to the conclusion that this egg belonged to a species of land dragon which was even more primitive than a wyvern dragon. While Lu Fan was closing the system window with his hand, he closed his eyes and began to wonder how the princess could call this thing a dragon. After thinking about this, he told the princess that the dragon egg's abilities were quite good. Upon hearing this, the princess turned her head towards him and was somewhat surprised. She started staring at Lu Fan and wondered if he really could see the egg's statistics. She also started wondering if Lu Fan didn't understand what a dragon egg meant to a dragon master. Upon feeling the princess's gaze, Han-ki placed her hand on her cheek, turned her head towards her, and asked Lu Fan who they were. Lu Fan closed his eyes and with a smile, he reassured his aunt that he would take care of them. The princess approached Lu Fan and while looking into his eyes, she explained to him that without a dragon master was worthless. She asked Lu Fan if he would become her servant, then he could become the most powerful profession ever recorded in history. She also asked him if he didn't get excited just thinking about it. Lu Fan turned his head towards her and with a forced smile, replied that he was quite excited. After saying this, he refused to accept her proposal. Upon hearing this, she was shocked as she couldn't believe that someone had rejected the proposal of a princess like herself. She couldn't help but get angry. She tightly grabbed the magic staff, and while her body was emitting a powerful energy, she started looking at Lu Fan with an aggressive gaze and asked him if he knew what he was saying. She also asked him if he was refusing to become her servant, and to become the master who would write the story of the dragons. Lu Fan's expression changed drastically. He began looking at the princess with an aggressive gaze and told them that if they had come to look for him only for this reason, then they could go back where they came from. He also added that he had no interest in either the egg or being her slave. Upon hearing this, the princess began to look down at the ground with an indignant gaze and clenched her fist tightly. Chui Hongtai stood up and while staring aggressively at Lu Fan, he also clenched his fist tightly and asked him how dare he speak disrespectfully to the princess who personally was giving him the opportunity to succeed. After saying this, he mocked Lu Fan by calling him a fool who didn't know how to appreciate things. Lu Fan closed his eyes and asked him to stop talking nonsense as he was not willing to be anyone's slave. Upon hearing this, Chui Hongtai became somewhat confused. The princess began to stare at Lu Fan aggressively and while pointing her finger at him, she ordered Chui Hongtai to teach him a severe lesson for mocking her. Upon hearing the order, Chui Hongtai clenched his fist and palm together and while staring at Lu Fan, he responded with understood. Seeing this, Han-Ki stood in front of Lu Fan and asked both of them not to get angry. She also added that if Lu Fan didn't want to accept the deal, then it was better to forget about it. Lu Fan simply turned his head towards the princess, and while angrily staring at her, he remained silent. Chui Hongtai approached them and asked her to leave. Seeing that she didn't want to follow the order, he punched Han-Ki hard, causing her to fall to the ground. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan was somewhat shocked and confused at the same time. Quickly, Lu Fan approached her, crouched down, and while holding Han-Ki's shoulders, asked if she was okay. While supporting herself on the ground with one hand, Han-Ki touched her cheek where she had been punched with the other hand. She closed her eyes and reassured Lu Fan not to worry because she was fine. While the two of them were conversing, Chui Hongtai began to look at Lu Fan with a murderous gaze and slowly started approaching them. He prepared his fist to strike Lu Fan and told them that commoners who dared to challenge the noble princess of the kingdom of Tai Kai had no guts. Lu Fan ignored Chui Hongtai's words and asked her aunt to stand up. While they were distracted, he started moving his fist towards Lu Fan's head. Han-Ki turned her head back and upon seeing how he was about to hit Lu Fan, she called his attention and warned him about the attack. Just before Chui Hongtai could attack Lu Sheng, a powerful flame began to rapidly advance towards him. Luckily, Chui Hongtai was able to dodge the attack. Although in the process he received a small cut on his cheek, the person who had attacked him was none other than Lu Fan. While he was aiming at Chui Hongtai with the dagger, it emitted a powerful flame. He stared into his eyes aggressively and told him that he was going to kill both of them for attacking his family. Chui Hongtai knew that Lu Fan was not joking, so he quickly took a step back. While Han-Ki was crouched on the ground, she grabbed Lu Fan's arm and, while looking at Chui Hongtai with a surprised look, asked Lu Fan not to rush. Seeing that Chui Hongtai had stepped back, the princess turned her head towards him and asked what he was doing. She once again ordered him to punish Lu Fan severely. While Lu Fan was looking down, he caught the princess's attention. Upon hearing Lu Fan's voice, she turned her head towards him. Lu Fan approached her and gave her a strong slap on the face, causing her to start falling towards the ground. He started looking at her with an aggressive look, clenched his teeth tightly, and ordered her to shut up and take away her servant trash and leave here. He also added that he didn't care if she was the princess of a kingdom. While Lu Fan was distracted, Chui Hongtai unsheathed the dagger and swiftly approached Lu Fan, asking him how a despicable person like him dared to lay hands on the princess. Just before Chui Hongtai could attack Lu Fan, he unsheathed his own dagger and with a precise movement struck his dagger, causing it to fall to the ground. Upon seeing this, Chui Hongtai quickly withdrew his hand and while looking at Lu Fan began to wonder what was happening. Quickly he approached the princess, got down on his knees, and while reaching out his hand to help her stand up, he asked her if she was okay. While with one hand she was covering the cheek where Lu Fan had hit her, with the other she began to stand up, and while looking at the ground, she started trembling. She slapped Chui Hongtai hard in the face, and while staring into his eyes with a furious look, called him useless and asked how he could think that she was fine. She gave Chui Hongtai the order to go and kill Lu Fan, since if she couldn't have Lu Fan, who was a dragon master, then she preferred him dead. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan began to stare at her with a murderous look, and while his dagger was emitting flames, he assumed a defensive stance. At the same time, in Lu Fan's room where Xiaoyu was peacefully sleeping on his bed, his phone started ringing, causing her to wake up. The person who was calling Lu Fan was Qin Q. When she saw that he didn't answer the call, she thought it was strange because this number was the one Lu Fan had given her when they had returned to the city. She called several times, and seeing that no one answered, she began to wonder if she had dialed the wrong number. While she was walking, holding the magic staff in one hand and her phone in the other, she started looking at her phone and decided to search for Lu Fan's house location. At that moment, a big explosion occurred near her, causing her to quickly move away from the area. From Aunt Lu Fan's shop, Chui Hongtai was propelled outwards, while holding the magical staff with one hand and supporting himself on the ground with the other hand to stop his body in motion. Due to the noise of the explosion, many people started approaching the area. As Lu Fan's body emitted a powerful flame, he began to approach Chui Hongtai, who was leaning on the ground with the help of the magical staff. Upon seeing people starting to approach the area, the princess pointed her magic staff at them and addressed them as low-class individuals, ordering them to leave. Chui Hongtai, who was crouched on the ground with one hand holding the magical staff, placed his other hand on the ground, bowed his head, closed his eyes tightly, clenched his teeth, and explained to the princess that Lu Fan's skills were not bad. Now that he had failed to follow the princess's order, he thought of himself as an incompetent subordinate. The princess began to look at Chui Hongtai with an aggressive gaze, clenched her teeth tightly, and called him trash for not being able to defeat Lu Fan. After saying this, she started to smile, and while her eye was emitting a malevolent energy, she decided to help Chui Hongtai a little. She grabbed the magic staff tightly, closed her eyes, and began to activate a spell, causing a malevolent energy to appear around her. Lu Fan approached a little, and while looking at the princess with eyes of surprise, he realized that the spell the princess was using was like the opposite extreme of Qin Q. After seeing this, it didn't take him long to come to the conclusion that she also had a hidden profession. At that moment, Qin Q appeared. With one hand holding the magic staff, she started approaching Lu Fan and asked him what had happened. Upon hearing Qin Q's voice, Lu Fan turned his head towards her and asked her what she was doing here. At that moment, Chui Hongtai began to stand up, and little by little the princess's spell started to take effect. He extended his hands to the sides, causing a wave of evil energy to shoot out in all directions. Lu Fan and Qin Q quickly put a hand in front of their faces and started wondering what was happening. Thanks to the spell that the princess had cast, Chui Hongtai's body suddenly grew, and while he held the magic staff in one hand, he stared at Lu Fan with a murderous look and started advancing towards them. Chui Hongtai had the combat profession and was a level 30 guardian knight. Princess Jinju had a hidden profession and was a level 15 spiritual sorceress. Lu Fan quickly realized that Chui Hongtai had turned into a monster. While he was lost in his thoughts, Qin Q stood in front of him, and while she pointed her magical staff at Chui Hongtai, she explained to Lu Fan that she was here to help him. Lu Fan turned his head towards her and began to wonder what she was doing. Chui Hongtai gathered momentum and started moving quickly towards Lu Fan with the intention of attacking him. Seeing this, Lu Fan slightly turned his head back and asked her not to come closer. After saying this, he asked her to help take care of his aunt who was inside the shop. Chui Hongtai attacked Lu Fan using the magic staff, but luckily he managed to react in time. He jumped and quickly moved away from the area, causing his magic staff to hit the ground. Lu Fan moved several meters away, placed a hand on the ground, and stopped his body in motion. While staring at Chui Hongtai, he thought to himself that this creature's attack power had become very high. He believed that now he would need to use the dragon stimulus along with the dragon claws. Chui Hongtai stood up and while looking at Lu Fan, began extracting the magic staff from the ground. While the princess was holding the staff with one hand, she clenched her other fist, stared fixedly at Lu Fan, and ordered Chui Hongtai to end his life, as only in this way would she feel satisfied. With an evil smile, Chui Hongtai told Lu Fan that thanks to the princess's enhancement, he wouldn't be a match for him. At that moment, Xiaoyu broke through the second floor wall and emerged outside, leaving both Lu Fan and Chui Hongtai confused. While her body was surrounded by powerful flames, she began to smile, and upon seeing Xiaoyu's incredible power, the princess was shocked. At that moment, Xiaoyu transformed her body into the black dragon. Then, while she was looking at Chui Hongtai, she started roaring. Lu Fan simply put a hand on his waist and with a smile told the princess that now it was his turn to vent. While Xiaoyu was staring at Chui Hongtai with a murderous look, she began to roar. Then, she gathered momentum and slowly advanced towards him, extending her sharp claw and preparing to attack. Upon seeing such a powerful dragon like Xiaoyu, the princess panicked. She tightly gripped the magical staff with both hands and started screaming. As Xiaoyu approached and prepared to attack, Chui Hongtai was shocked and started feeling afraid. Just before Chui Hongtai had time to react, Xiaoyu struck him with her claw, causing his body to hit the ground. She had hit him with such force that even the floor shattered into pieces, causing terrible pain to Chui Hongtai, who began spitting blood from his mouth. The princess fell to the ground, and while holding onto the magical staff with one hand, she closed her eyes and started screaming. As she lay on the ground, she began wondering how this was possible. She couldn't believe that Xiaoyu had defeated Chui Hongtai in just one strike. While Xiaoyu was crushing Chui Hongtai's body with her paw, with the little strength he had left, he reached out to the princess and asked for help. The princess knelt down, turned her body towards Xiaoyu, extended the magic staff towards her. Then she brought her hand closer to the magic staff and activated the magic. Slowly, the staff began to glow, causing a powerful evil energy to start appearing. As the princess stared at Xiaoyu intently, she called Chui Hongtai useless and asked him to hold on a little longer. At that moment, a system window appeared to indicate to Lu Fan that she was using an ability. Xiaoyu raised her head and, while staring at the princess, let out a powerful roar towards her. Within seconds, the roar reached her and the princess quickly covered her ears, ceasing to use the ability. Gradually, the dark aura emerging from the staff began to disappear. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that Xiaoyu was using an ability called Dragon's Inheritance. This ability reduced damage received by 50% and provided immunity to all negative effects. It also increased self-regeneration capacity by 500%. Xiaoyu tightly grabbed Chui Hongtai's body using her paw, causing him to start spitting blood and begging her to let go. She lifted Chui Hongtai's body from the ground and forcefully threw it to the side, making it crash against the floor, creating a large cloud of smoke in the process. While holding the staff with one hand, the princess placed the other in front of her face and closed her eyes. Several seconds later, once the smoke curtain began to disappear, Chui Hongtai started crawling towards the princess. He reached out his hand towards her and, while his body was trembling, he apologized to her. As the princess leaned on her magical staff, she stared aggressively at Chui Hongtai. She clenched her teeth tightly and thought that Xiaoyu really was a dragon. Thinking about this, she realized that besides their Jin family's dragon eggs, there were also other dragons that existed. While the princess was lost in her thoughts, Lu Fan stomped on the ground forcefully to get her attention. He addressed her as Princess Jinju, while she held onto the magical staff with both hands. Upon hearing his voice, she quickly turned towards him and couldn't help but feel afraid. Lu Fan was not advancing towards the princess alone, but behind him was the dragoness Xiaoyu. With her wings extended to the sides, she began to stare at the princess with a murderous look. While holding a dagger in one hand, Lu Fan started moving towards the princess and asked her if she wanted to kill him as a way to vent. Upon seeing that Xiaoyu was approaching, Princess Jinju fell to the ground. With one hand gripping onto her magical staff, she supported herself with the other on the floor. Then she started looking at Lu Fan and asked him not to come any closer. Her body began to tremble with fear, while tears were falling from her eyes. She pointed at Lu Fan with the magic staff and reminded him that they had attacked her servant and left him severely injured. She also added that if this wasn't enough, Lu Fan was humiliating and threatening her. While tears were falling from her eyes, she started staring at Lu Fan with a fearful look and asked him if he knew what consequences this would have. She revealed to him that now he was the public enemy of the Taiki realm. Upon hearing the princess's words, Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger and slowly approached her, asking if she was threatening him. While the princess was lying on the ground and pointing her staff at Lu Fan, she saw that he had unsheathed his dagger. Upon realizing this, she was shocked and thought that something bad was going to happen. Several seconds later, Lu Fan reached the princess. He slightly lowered his head and, while staring into her eyes with a murderous look, he reminded her that she herself had ordered her subordinate to attack his family. Upon hearing this, she started feeling even more afraid. She lifted her head slightly towards Lu Fan, and upon seeing his expression, panic set in as she asked him what he was going to do now. Lu Fan asked her if she was not the princess of Realm Taiki. At that moment, Xiaoyu opened her mouth, and while staring at the princess, she began to create a large fireball to attack her. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that the ability was charging. While Lu Fan was staring at the princess, He extended his dagger to one side, and while preparing to attack, he explained to her that he didn't care if she was a god or a princess. While the princess was looking at Lu Fan with a fearful gaze, she was left speechless and thought that something bad was going to happen. As Xiaoya's fireball gradually grew bigger, Lu Fan reached out his hand towards the princess, with his other hand preparing to attack. He stared fiercely into her eyes and explained to her that even if he faced a god, he would make them pay double. At that moment, someone riding on a hippogriff started approaching them quickly and caught Lu Fan's attention. This person was none other than Qin Qiu's father, named Qin Shanhai. While holding the reins of the hippogriff with one hand, he began to approach Lu Fan quickly. He stared at Lu Fan and ordered him to stop. Upon hearing the voice, Qin Qiu looked up at the sky and was stunned to see her father. She warned him not to come closer as it was dangerous. Xiaoya turned her head to the side, and upon seeing Qin Shanhai, she thought he was an enemy. While she was preparing the fireball to attack the princess, she turned her body towards him, and while staring at him aggressively, she prepared to attack. Upon seeing this, he gave the order to the hippogriff not to approach her. Lu Fan simply started looking down and remained still for several seconds. While the princess was holding the magic staff with both hands, she closed her eyes and turned her head to one side as she thought she was going to die. Using the dagger, Lu Fan cut the princess's magic staff in half, causing the magic ball to fall to the ground and rendering the staff useless. While Lu Fan was staring at Qin Shanhai, he ordered Xiaoya not to attack. Upon hearing the order, Xiaoya obeyed and closed her mouth, causing the fireball to slowly disappear. As Qin Shanhai rode past her on his hippogriff and began descending towards the ground, Xiaoya simply turned her head towards him and silently watched. Once the hippogriff got close to the ground, Qin Shanhai jumped off and landed on the ground. Several seconds later, the hippogriff sat down on the ground, turned its head towards Xiaoya, and was surprised by her size. While Qin Shanhai was petting the hippogriff, he slightly raised his head towards Xiaoya and he was surprised. He asked Lu Fan to quickly remove the dragon as there were many residents around. He thought that Xiaoya was a real dragon. He felt that she was different from the subspecies, since just being close to her, he could feel immense pressure. Upon hearing her father's voice, Qin Qiu emerged through the hole in the wall of the store. While holding the staff with both hands, she began to look at Lu Fan and asked him to listen to her father and trust them. Lu Fan slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing Qin Qiu, he fell silent and started wondering if he could really trust her father. Several seconds later, Lu Fan gave the order to Xiaoya to transform. Upon hearing the command, she obeyed and extended her hands to the sides, causing an intense fire to gradually appear around her body. At that moment, she began to roar and transform. Several seconds later, Xiaoya transformed, and as she was flying through the air, the hippogriff turned its head towards her and was impressed. While the princess lay on the ground trembling, Qin Shanhai approached her. He crouched down, placed one hand on the ground and rested the other on his knee. He stared at the princess intently and asked if she was okay and what she was doing here. He mentioned that he had just picked her up from the airport and didn't expect to find her here. While the two of them were talking, Qin Qiu grabbed Lu Fan's arm and asked him to come with her. Qin Shanhai closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile explained to the princess that the Qin family driver would be coming soon. He also added that he would take her and her subordinate to the hospital first. At the same time, Lu Fan, Qin Qiu, and Xiaoya entered the store and met Han Qi. She explained to Lu Fan that Qin Qiu had told her that her father might recognize this princess. Lu Fan crossed his arms and, while looking at the princess with an aggressive gaze, Han Qi approached him. She grabbed Lu Fan's arm and, while looking towards the princess and Qin Qiu's father, she explained to him that Qin Qiu had thought of a way to resolve this conflict, and for this reason, she had called her father. While Lu Fan was looking at the princess, he explained to Han Qi that he had a feeling that the princess would not surrender. While they were conversing, Qin Qiu and Xiaoya remained silent listening. At that moment, Qin Shanhai began to walk towards them. He reached out his hand towards them and with a smile, he explained that he completely understood the background of the situation. After saying this, he called Lu Fan's attention and told him that he had really surprised him by giving him a problem in their first encounter. Upon hearing this, everyone turned their heads towards Shanhai and were surprised. Meanwhile, Lu Fan was watching as Shanhai slowly approached them. He apologized for causing trouble and added that he couldn't be blamed for this matter. He entered the store through the hole in the wall. Han Qi approached him and while looking at him with a confused look, she asked how this matter was going to be resolved. Shanhai slightly lowered his head, took out a cigarette, and while putting it in his mouth, closed his eyes and explained to everyone that despite Princess Jin and Mr. Chui Hongtai being sent to the hospital, they still needed to give an explanation to the Jin family. After putting the cigarette in his mouth, He slightly lowered his head, took out a lighter, and while lighting the cigarette, closed his eyes. As he slowly approached her, he explained to everyone that the Jin family not only engaged in business, but also had certain influence at high levels of Taki's government. Han-ki approached him, and while looking at him with a surprised look, she explained to him that the other party had great influence. She also added that now that they had been hit by Lu Fan, she feared he would be punished by the Jin family. With an aggressive look, Lu Fan began to stare at Shanghai and told him that he didn't care if the princess had great power or if her family had money because he was not willing to sell his dignity for a mere dragon egg. Shanghai approached Lu Fan, while holding a cigarette in one hand, placed the other hand on Lu Fan's shoulder, closed his eyes, and started laughing. Then he blew smoke from the cigarette towards him and with a pleasant smile, congratulated Lu Fan for doing a good job and for having integrity. He also added that he appreciated him very much. Upon seeing the smoke approaching, Lu Fan slightly moved his body backwards and then began to stare at Shanghai, remaining silent. Shanghai asked Lu Fan and his aunt not to worry too much about this matter, as he had a way to solve it without getting Lu Fan into trouble. Using his hand, Shanghai put the cigarette in his mouth, and while inhaling the smoke, he started looking at Lu Fan and explained that only he could resolve this issue. He also added that he had a condition. Upon hearing this, everyone was surprised. Han-ki placed her hands on her chest and thought that something bad was about to happen. Lu Fan started staring aggressively at Shanghai and asked what the condition was. He took the cigarette out of his mouth, pointed it at Lu Fan, and while looking him straight in the eyes, explained that for him to help Lu Fan, he had to obtain the title of provincial champion in the grand examination. Han-ki grabbed Lu Fan's arm and both began silently staring at Shanghai. He told Lu Fan that he was going to do everything possible to help him. He revealed to them that he planned to delay the princess's actions until he finished his final exams. Upon hearing her father's words, Kin Q thought about the final exam. After thinking about this, she drew Lu Fan's attention and explained that this was something easy to do since there were countless outstanding students throughout the southern province. Shanghai approached Lu Fan and while staring into his eyes, explained that if he surpassed all the students and managed to get first place, then he would be able to help him. Upon hearing this, Han-ki grabbed Lu Fan's arm and while looking at him, asked what he was going to do. He simply closed his eyes and began to think. Several seconds later, he opened his eyes and while staring into Shanghai's eyes, he told him that he accepted the condition. At the same time, in the city hospital, Princess Jinju left her room and called Shanghai on the phone. She asked if Lu Fan had not been arrested. He asked her to calm down as they were going to immediately contact the higher authorities of Dragon City. He also added that it was necessary for them to resolve this matter related to Lu Fan. While she was walking down the hallway, she clenched her fist tightly and couldn't help but get angry. Upon seeing this, the nurse and the patient who were in the hallway turned their heads towards her and became somewhat confused. At that moment, the princess started looking up at the ceiling with an aggressive gaze. She gritted her teeth forcefully and told Shanghai that it was better this way. She also asked him to continue pressuring the higher-ups and tell them that she wanted that guy named Lu Fan dead. The next day, before the big exam, students gathered in the courtyard of 3rd High School. The students began chatting among themselves. Among them was one student who had reached level 11. One of the students approached a girl and asked if she wanted to team up with him since he had mastered mage skills. Several minutes later, a student caught everyone's attention as he pointed backwards and asked the others if that wasn't Lu Fan. Upon hearing this, several students turned their heads back and were surprised to see Lu Fan. One of the students told the others that this was a surprise because he had thought that Lu Fan had gone home to sell buns with his aunt. Upon hearing this, all the students started looking at Lu Fan. He put his hands in his pants pockets, closed his eyes, and simply began to walk. Another student asked the others why the outstanding student who had become useless wanted to participate in a test if no team wanted him. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan opened his eyes, turned his head to one side, and despite being bothered by the teasing, he decided not to respond as he was unwilling to stoop down to their level. At that moment, the principal appeared. He climbed onto the stage, placed both hands on the podium, and while looking at the students, he asked them to be silent. After saying this, the principal turned his head to one side and announced that the great examination of Southern Province was about to begin. While Lu Fan was silently observing and listening to the director, he remembered that after self-improving to level 15, the treasure maps received every day had not been used yet. It was a pity for him that they were all intermediate level. He recalled that 3 identical low-level treasure maps could be combined into one high-level map through the system, so it didn't take him long to conclude that if these 3 maps were combined into a high-level treasure map, They should become a map capable of preparing for the big exam. While Lu Fan was lost in his thoughts, someone caught his attention by asking if he was also going to participate in the big exam. Upon hearing the voice, he slightly turned his head back to see who it was. This person was none other than his classroom teacher. Lu Fan turned his head to the side and, while looking into the teacher's eyes, responded that yes, explaining that he also had to participate in the big exam because he had also improved his strength in recent days. He held a teleportation stone in his hand and approached Lu Fan. He reached out towards him to hand it over and, while looking into his eyes, asked him to work hard and also requested that he take this teleportation stone. Lu Fan took the teleportation stone in his hand, slightly lowered his head, and while looking into his eyes, began to smile. A system window appeared informing him that he had obtained a teleportation stone. To cheer up Lu Fan, the professor explained to him that he believed in his fighting spirit. He also added that his profession was no worse than any other. A statistics window for the trial teleportation stone appeared. This was a rare quality item. When used in the secret realm of testing, the user would be teleported to the first floor of the Celestial Tower, and when used in the Celestial Tower, the user would be teleported to the platform of the secret realm of testing. The professor turned his back on Lu Fan, and as he walked away, he slightly turned his head towards him and waved goodbye while explaining that the importance of their profession was too great. Even though this was just an exam, any mistake could lead to injuries or even death. He advised Lu Fan to try to join classmates for the essay. He also added that if this really didn't work, then Lu Fan could use the teleportation stone to leave. He also asked him not to make things difficult for himself. While holding the teleportation stone in his hand, Lu Fan slightly raised his head towards the professor and responded with a knowing smile. After saying this, he turned around and thought that the team's score was going to be divided among his teammates. He couldn't join any team because he not only wanted to pass the test but also wanted to come in first. While he was walking, one of the students approached his friend's ear and started speaking ill of Lu Fan. Upon hearing this, his friend began looking at Lu Fan with contempt. While Lu Fan was lost in his thoughts, someone caught his attention. He quickly turned his head to see who it was. Once he turned his head back, he saw that the person who had called him was Kin Q. She wasn't alone. There was a girl with pink hair by her side. Lu Fan asked her if that was her teammate. While she held onto her friend's arm, both of them started to approach Lu Fan. Kin Q began to look into Lu Fan's eyes, and with a smile, she replied yes. She introduced him to her best friend named Xiao Man and also added that she was an incredibly strong person. Xiao Man began to approach Lu Fan, and while looking at him with a disdainful gaze, she greeted him. Then a statistics window appeared to show him that she was Tao Xiao Man and had a level 1 swordsman combat profession. Kin Q approached Lu Fan. While she was touching her hair with her hand, she started looking at him and couldn't help but blush. She asked him if he wanted to team up with her for the trial. Upon hearing this, Xiao Man became somewhat confused and started wondering what she was thinking. Lu Fan began to move away from her. He slightly turned his head back, and while looking into her eyes, he started waving goodbye to her. He apologized to Kin Q, explaining that he had planned to participate alone. He also added that he knew she wanted to help him, but this was a condition he had promised on his own. He decided to go to the exam location first, so he said goodbye to them. Upon hearing this, she became sad. While holding the magic staff with both hands, she started looking down at the ground with a sorrowful expression. She thought that due to Lu Fan's strength, anyone who associated themselves with him would only hold him back. Xiao Man crossed her arms, turned her head towards Kin Q, and asked her why she wanted to invite the person with the weakest profession to join the team. While Kin Q was holding the magic staff in one hand and watching Lu Fan walk away from them, she started smiling and explained to Xiao Man that he would definitely be this year's top scorer in the south. After saying this, she turned her back on Xiao Man and began walking away. Quickly, Xiao Man started following her and asked what she was talking about. She also asked if she hadn't fallen in love with Lu Fan, the dragon tamer. Upon hearing this, Kin Q closed her eyes, turned her head to the side, and while starting to blush, asked her to stop imagining things. Several minutes later, Lu Fan entered the portal and went to the secret realm to begin the trail. This place was the Dragon Nation, and it was located in the southern province of Zhonghai City. Once Lu Fan arrived at the secret realm where the grand exam was going to take place, he saw that it was filled with students. While they were conversing among themselves, Lu Fan began to walk, and as he looked around, he thought that this was where the trial began. At that moment, a system window appeared in the sky and Director Bai caught everyone's attention. Upon hearing the director's voice, all the students started looking at the system window. He explained to them that the portals in the sky were divided into 4 levels: normal, difficult, fear, and nightmare. When they opened, selected candidates from each level could enter the Celestial Tower using a teleportation stone. He also added that the normal tower was all projection and would not cause fatal injuries. A portal with normal difficulty appeared in the sky. This portal had a score multiplier of 0.9. Gradually, several candidates began to enter this portal. The director once again drew everyone's attention and explained that from the difficult level onwards, all monsters were real. When someone used a teleportation stone to exit these portals, their score could be preserved. Several seconds later, a portal with great difficulty appeared in the sky. This portal had a score multiplier of 1, and many of the students used the teleportation stone and entered this portal. Almost everyone had chosen this level of difficulty, as going higher was suicide. Only those with hidden professions could dare to choose higher difficulties. Several minutes later, Kin-Kyu and Zio-Man arrived. The director once again drew everyone's attention and explained that the monsters in the fear level were the most ferocious. He did not recommend this portal for individual challenges. He asked everyone not to think about teammates sharing scores, as life was more important. While Lu Fan and the others were listening to the director's explanation, someone nearby started laughing. Upon hearing the voice, the 3 turned their heads to one side. This person was Hongwu. He had a hidden combat profession and was a level 14 Kaigong master. While Hongwu was holding the teleportation stone in one hand, he extended the other towards the portal. As his body slowly turned into dust to enter the portal, he pointed at the system window and asked the director if he was watching. He also added that this time, he would achieve the highest score. While Hongwu and several other students were entering the portal, Zio-Man explained to Kin-Kyu that he was ranked number 1 expert in the number 1 middle school. She also mentioned that he was among the top 5 in their province. Upon hearing this, Kin-Kyu started looking at Hongwu and explained that he was a master of Kin-Gong, a versatile combat profession capable of both attacking and defending. Seeing him challenging alone, she told her it was now their turn. The students who were challenging the portal with the fear difficulty panicked as they thought that with Hongwu, they were doomed. Now they could only aspire to lower ranks, as they were no match for him. They began to regret choosing this difficulty. Several minutes later, once everyone entered the portals, in a room where all the teachers from the schools were gathered watching everything through cameras. The teachers from number 1 middle school believed that Hongwu was their most formidable student. The principal of number 1 middle school crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and with a smile told others that it was a sure bet that Hongwu would become the top scorer. Upon hearing this, Director Bai turned his head towards him and began to silently observe him. The director of number 1 middle school also added that Mr. Kin's daughter, Kin-Kyu, was also quite good. In his opinion, she should be among the top 3. While he was speaking, Shanhai simply placed his hand under his chin and quietly watched the screen. Director Bai closed his eyes and sighed, thinking it was a pity for Lu Fan. He thought that if he had awakened another hidden profession, maybe he wouldn't have allowed number 1 middle school to take all the credit. While Shanhai had his hand under his chin, he slightly turned his head towards the directors and with a smile explained to them that for first place this time, he had a candidate in mind. He also added that he was quite optimistic about him. Upon hearing this, both of them were surprised and asked him who that candidate was. Shanhai revealed to everyone that the candidate was Lu Fan, the dragon tamer from number 3 school. Upon hearing this, Director Bai was left speechless. All the students had left, but he hadn't entered the Celestial Tower yet, so the teachers began to wonder if he had given up. Realizing this, the director of number 1 middle school closed his eyes and while laughing, asked Shinhai to stop joking since they couldn't expect anything from a dragon tamer. According to the ranking table, Hongwu was in first place with 3,000 points. He was on the 4th floor which had a fear difficulty level. The second ones were Kin-Kyu and Zio-Man. Both had 900 points and were on the 3rd floor of the tower that had a fear difficulty. The 4th one was Zhang Tao with 300 points. He was on the 2nd floor of the Celestial Tower that had a hard difficulty. The principal of number 1 middle school drew attention to the others and told them that Hongwu from their high school was already on the 4th floor, occupying first place. While Director Bai was looking at Lu Fan with a surprised look, he revealed to the others that he had not given up but was waiting for the portal of the last level of difficulty to appear. Upon hearing this, the director of number 1 middle school turned his head towards him and his expression changed drastically. At that moment, the portal for the Big Nightmare difficulty test appeared. This portal had a score multiplier of 9.9. While Lu Fan was looking at the portal, he took out the teleportation stone, extended his hand to one side, and prepared to enter the portal. Seeing this, the director of number 1 middle school was surprised and asked the others if Lu Fan was really choosing the nightmare trial. He also added that the nightmare trial was one way only, thinking that Lu Fan was too overconfident. He thought that Lu Fan was crazy, so he asked Director Bai to stop him. Upon hearing this, Director Bai called Lu Fan's attention and revealed to him that no person who had challenged the nightmare trial had returned unscathed. Just before he could finish speaking, with a smile on his face, Lu Fan entered the portal. Several seconds later, Lu Fan's body turned into dust and entered the portal. Upon seeing this, Director Bai stood up in terror. He revealed to Lu Fan that the last person who had challenged the nightmare trial was 8 years ago, and had been devoured by ferocious beasts, suffering a miserable death. The director of number 1 middle school crossed his arms, slightly turned his head towards Director Bai, and told him that this was absurd. He asked Bai if the students from number 3 high school had been educated about the rules of the grand exam. He also added that Lu Fan was doomed to die. He also added that the Shanghai trial needed improvement since Lu Fan couldn't be compared at all with Hongwu if they were going to focus on the performance of the talented Kai Gong master. While Shanghai was sitting in the chair and had his head resting on his arm, he closed one eye and with a smile explained that it was still too early to draw conclusions. He asked them why they didn't observe a little before making deductions. Upon hearing this, Director Bai turned his head towards him and while looking at him with a surprised look, he asked why he trusted Lu Fan so much. He began to wonder if it was possible that Lu Fan had some hidden trick up his sleeve. At the same time, Lu Fan entered the first floor of the nightmare trial. This place was full of thorny branches and fog. Once he arrived, he began to look around. Within seconds, the monsters that inhabited this floor appeared and started approaching Lu Fan. Upon seeing this, he unsheathed his dagger and assumed a defensive stance. While looking at the fog, he thought that in the fog of the Celestial Nightmare Tower, there were at least 10 level 10 monsters. At that moment, 3 wolves appeared and began to roar. A statistics window about the wolves appeared. They were level 10 black mane wolves. They had several abilities. Their bite caused continuous bleeding damage to the target. Their nocturnal howl increased all attributes of friendly targets while resetting ability cooldowns. One of the black mane wolves started advancing quickly towards Lu Fan with the intention of attacking by surprise. He didn't take long to notice the attack, so he quickly assumed a defensive stance. He extended his dagger to one side, causing its blade to ignite in flames. He turned his head towards the black mane wolf and with a smile thought that this was about to begin. Using the dagger, Lu Fan used the skill Dragon Fang Strike. This skill mobilized the Kai of the dragon, delivering a powerful blow with his current weapon. He quickly advanced towards the monsters and in the blink of an eye, he ended their lives. After finishing off the monsters, he turned his head back and started looking at the corpses with an aggressive gaze. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform him that the first floor of Nightmare Trial Sky Tower had been completed. Now Lu Fan had a score of 990 points. Upon seeing that Lu Fan had defeated the monsters in one hit, the director of number 1 middle school stood up and was amazed. He began to wonder who Lu Fan was and why he was ridiculously strong. Another teacher sitting next to him also became astonished and revealed that Lu Fan's attributes were clearly above the level of his peers. Director Bai also stood up and, while looking at the screen, remained speechless. He started wondering if Lu Fan had found the legendary dragon. Shanghai simply placed his hand under his chin, closed his eyes, and began to smile. Lu Fan ranked second with 990 points just below Hongwu, who already had 3,000 points. At the same time, while the director of number 1 middle school and the others were observing Lu Fan from the surveillance room, a person wearing a detective suit began to approach the room. This person was wearing a cap and glasses, with one hand in their pocket and holding a briefcase with the other. The director of number 1 middle school and Director Bai stood up and were dumbfounded as they couldn't believe that Lu Fan had been able to defeat the black mane wolves with just one blow. While everyone was distracted, the man opened the door of the room and caught everyone's attention. Upon hearing his voice, Shanghai turned his head back and became alert upon seeing him. The man entered the room, placed his hand on top of his cap, and introduced himself as Kangxing, a special envoy from Longdu. He had come here to take someone back to Longdu for investigation. He took off his cap and while holding it in his hand, he started looking at Shanghai and asked where the Dragon Master Lu Fan was. A statistics window appeared. Kangxing had the combat class and was level 57. At the same time, in the nightmare trial, Lu Fan began cutting the vines to make his way using the dagger. While holding the dagger with one hand, he extended the other forward and opened the system map. Upon seeing that he had found what he had been looking for, He became happy. A system window appeared to inform him that he had arrived at the designated location on this treasure map. Then another window of the system appeared to inform him that a high-level treasure map had been synthesized. While Lu Fan was looking at the system map, he couldn't help but feel excited because the high-level treasure map that he had synthesized before entering the trial realm was on the first floor of the Celestial Tower. Lu Fan began cutting through the vines in his path, and once he cleared it, he saw a book. He reached out and grabbed it. Then a system window appeared to inform him that he had obtained a skill book called Accelerated Growth. This book was shining. It had several gems embedded in the cover. According to the statistics window, this book was called Accelerate Growth and it was of rare quality. The skill book allowed the user to learn a passive skill of accelerated growth after its use, which increased the amount of experience obtained by pets by 100%. Without hesitation, Lu Fan opened the book, causing it to emit a powerful energy that began to surround his body. In the process, he acquired the ability of accelerated growth. While he was looking at the book, he thought that this skill was very suitable for small nocturnal creatures. While his body was surrounded by a powerful energy, he clenched his fist tightly, turned his head towards it, and while looking at his fist, he smiled and thought that when he had left the morning village, he felt that Xiaoyu was leveling up too slowly. But now with this passive ability, she would level up much faster. At the same time, in the room where Director Bai, Shanhai, and Qiang Shang were present and were observing Lu Fan through a screen. He turned his head towards Director Bai and explained to him that since Lu Fan was a student from their school, Bai should immediately interrupt his trial and ask him to come back here. Director Bai started approaching him and with a serious look called him Excellence and explained to him that even if there was an important matter at hand, it would be better to wait for the students to finish their exams. As the director of the Third Institute, he was willing to take responsibility for Lu Fan's actions on behalf of him. Qiang Shang turned his head forward and while touching his glasses with his hand, he explained that even though Director Bai could take responsibility instead of Lu Fan, he couldn't receive the punishment for him. Upon hearing this, Director Bai became confused and asked what punishment he was talking about. At that moment, Shanhai approached Qiang Shang and grabbed his arm, causing him to turn his head back. While Shanhai had one hand in his pocket, he stared at Qiang Shang intently and speaking in terms of old classmates. He asked him to listen to what he had to say. The director of number 1 middle school reached out his hand towards them and asked what the Dragon Master had done. Qiang Shang turned his body backwards and with a little force made Shanhai release his arm, leaving him somewhat confused. With an angry look, he asked Shanhai not to distract him while he was performing his task and also requested that he not try to approach him. After saying this, he began to stare at Shanhai with a furious look, then pointed at him with his finger, and despite not knowing why he was defending the dragon tamer, warned him that if he got involved in this matter, both the Jin family and the high-ranking members of the dragon clan would not be pleased. Shanhai simply started to look at Qiang Shang with a serious gaze and remained silent. After saying this, he pushed Shanhai using his hand, turned around, and asked him if he understood this. Then he told Director Bai to bring Lu Fan. While he was distracted, Shanhai called him an old friend. Upon hearing this, he turned his head back. Shanhai took out a cigarette, put it in his mouth, lit the lighter, and while bringing it close to his mouth to light the cigarette, he explained to Qiang Shang that the relationship between the high-ranking officials of Longdu and the Jin family had an impact on both the Dragon Kingdom and the Taiki Kingdom, which was certainly complicated. He revealed to everyone that once Lu Fan's secret was revealed, both the high-ranking officials and the Jin family would cease to be important. He lit the cigarette and while holding it in his hand, with a serious look he began to stare at Qiang Shang and told him that today, no one could take Lu Fan away. Upon hearing this, Qiang Shang couldn't help but get angry. He started looking at Shanhai and while pointing his finger at him, he asked him to stop talking nonsense as he didn't believe that Lu Fan had a secret. He also added that disobeying the orders of the special envoy was an act of insubordination. While they were conversing, the directors remained silent without interrupting. Qiang Shang turned around, but at that moment, Shanhai approached him and grabbed his wrist. He turned his head towards him and they both started staring into each other's eyes, creating tension in the atmosphere. While holding a cigarette with one hand, Shanhai stared at Qiang Shang and told him that even if he was making a mistake, he was willing to accept it. Qiang Shang turned his head towards him and with an aggressive look revealed to him that his actions would be presented to the senior management of Longdu. Shanhai was a level 57 knight, and Qiang Shang was a level 57 swordsman. Director Bai approached them and asked them to calm down as they should not affect the important trial exam. Kang Shang made Shanghai let go of his hand, then he turned his head slightly towards him and asked why he was going so far for Lu Fan. Shanghai took the cigarette out of his mouth, turned his head towards the screen, and while exhaling the air from his lungs, he asked him if he didn't feel intrigued by Lu Fan's secret, which angered the high-ranking officials of Longdu and the Jin family. Kang Shang raised his head, and while looking at the screen, he was shocked to see that Lu Fan had chosen the nightmare level. At the same time in the nightmare trial, Lu Fan made his way through cutting vines and reached a door. At first, he only wanted to test how far he could go alone, but now that he had the passive ability, he decided to continue exploring further. While Lu Fan had his hand on his hip and was observing the door with a smile, his status window appeared. Lu Fan was a level 5 dragon master. He had 280,000 yuan. He had a strength of 184 points, agility of 103, spirit of 47, and stamina of 158 points. He had the art of taming dragons, which allowed him to be able to tame dragons. He had an ability called Dragon Claw, which allowed him to transform his arm into a dragon claw, whose power depended on the current pet dragon. He had another ability called Dragon's Inspiration. This ability allowed him to inspire himself and the dragon pet, increasing all attributes and attack power by 30%. The skill Accelerate Growth increased the amount of experience obtained by his pet by 100%. He extended his hand to one side, causing a fireball to appear. He decided it was better to summon Xiaoya so that she could gain early experience. At the same time in the surveillance room, Kang Shang turned his head towards the others and with a surprised look asked them what made Lu Fan so special as to dare to challenge the nightmare trial. The director of number 1 middle school called his attention. While he was pointing at the screen, he asked if he hadn't seen how Lu Fan had defeated the monsters with just one blow. At that moment, Xiaoya appeared and started roaring. Upon hearing her roar, Kang Shang and the director of number 1 middle school turned their heads towards the screen and were shocked. While Lu Fan had his hand extended towards the sky, and his body was surrounded by powerful flames, he gave Xiaoya the order to come out. Upon seeing Xiaoya, everyone was shocked and began to wonder if she was a dragon. Xiaoya approached the stone door, then extended her hand towards it, and while staring at it intently, prepared her claw to break it into pieces. While Shanghai was observing this, he told the others that despite having seen the dragoness Xiaoya once, seeing her again still impacted him. Xiaoya forcefully struck the stone door with her claw, breaking it into pieces in the process. While Kang Shang and the others were watching this with their mouths open, Shanghai turned his body towards them and revealed to all of them that what they had just seen was Lu Fan's secret. He took the cigarette out of his mouth, reached towards the screen where Xiaoya was, turned his body towards the others, and with a smile told them that Lu Fan was the only dragon master in history who had a dragon. Seeing that Lu Fan had actually managed to tame a dragon, Director Bai was speechless. At the same time, Lu Fan arrived on floor 2 of the nightmare trial. While she was burning all the monstrous plants using her fire breath, Lu Fan began cutting the vines using his dagger. A system notification appeared to inform everyone that Lu Fan had unlocked level 2. While the principal of number 1 middle school was watching how Lu Fan and his dragon were defeating the monsters, he was surprised and told the others that this was the strength of dragons. He also added that without a third class change, one couldn't face his dragon. Another teacher approached and, seeing how Lu Fan was finishing off the monsters with a single blow, revealed to the others that after leveling up, he would be able to bring down an entire country. Lu Fan took first place with 58,500 points, far surpassing Hong Wu, who was in second place on the Fear Trial's second floor with 27,550 points. In third and fourth place were Qin Q and Xiao Man, who were on the Fear Trial's third floor with 12,570 points. In the blink of an eye, thanks to Xiaoya massacring monsters, Lu Fan reached level 13 of the Nightmare Trial. While Director Bai was observing Lu Fan, he revealed to them that not only was his dragon powerful, but he had also improved his own ability. He revealed to everyone that Lu Fan's attributes far exceeded 100, even without summoning the dragon. He could still maintain first place in Zhanghai City. Shanghai took the cigarette out of his mouth and while holding it in his hand, turned his head towards Kang Shang and with a smile asked him if he still wanted to take Lu Fan before the higher-ups. Kang Shang turned his head towards him and while looking into his eyes, he replied that today he had finally broadened his vision and understood why he had dared to offend the Jin family. Shanghai turned his back on him, lowered his head, closed his eyes, and as he put the cigarette in his mouth, decided to copy a fragment of Lu Fan's great exam video and send it to the master. So from now on, there would be no need to bother intermediaries in the relationship between Lu Fan and the Jin family. He asked King Shong to go back where he came from. Upon hearing the name master, he was shocked and asked if he was really going to send it to him. While Shanhai had the cigarette in his mouth, he turned his head towards him and with a smile revealed to him that he was going to send the video to the Marquis of the North, to King. At the same time, Lu Fan and Xiaoyu reached level 20 of the Nightmare Trial. In front of them was a dark corridor. Slowly, someone who was holding a magic ball began to approach them. This person was a woman who had her hand extended to one side and had summoned a magic ball in the palm of her hand. Behind her were 3 knights, according to the statistics window. Her name was Dark Sacrifice and she was level 15. She had an ability called Black Curse, which reduced the target's stats by 50% while increasing all allies' stats by 25%. She had another ability called Merging into Darkness. This ability enveloped oneself and all allied targets in shadows for 5 seconds, making them immune to all attacks. Her last ability was called Darkness Control. She could lead the Dark Knights and make them fight for her. While Lu Fan was petting Xiaoyu, he began to smile. With the growth acceleration effect, she was about to level up. Lu Fan reached out his hand towards the woman and ordered Xiaoyu to use the lava flame ability. She obeyed. While she stared at the woman with a killer look, she opened her mouth and conjured a fireball. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that the ability was recharging. Xiaoyu opened her mouth and unleashed a powerful flame towards the woman and the Dark Knights. She was using the lava flame ability, which allowed her to continuously emit flames forward, causing damage and healing herself at the same time. In a matter of seconds, Xiaoyu's flames ended the lives of the woman and the Dark Knights, burning them down to their bones, completing level 20 of the Nightmare Trial in the process. While Xiaoyu was closing her mouth, Lu Fan began to cover his face with his hand and couldn't help but smile. 2 system windows appeared because Lu Fan and Xiaoyu had leveled up. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but praise her. Lu Fan took first place on the leaderboard with 90,000 points. In second place was Hongwu, who had 31,000 points and was at level 34 of the Fear Trial. In third place were Qin Q and Xiaoman, who had 1690 points and were also in the Fear Trial. Lu Fan turned his head to the side and with a smile asked Xiaoyu to come with him as they were going to clean the Celestial Tower together. 1 hour later, on a mountain located at level 50 of the Fear Trial, a big explosion occurred. This explosion had been created by Hongwu. He was quite tired and his clothes were torn as he had been fighting non-stop against the monsters for several hours. After defeating the last monster, a system window appeared to notify him that level 50 had been cleared. While he was catching his breath, he began to wipe his chin with his hand and thought that this year had been unlucky since the exam this year was very difficult. Against the type of monsters that Hongwu was fighting, they usually appeared at level 70. He adopted an offensive stance and with a determined smile, he decided to obtain first place in the great exam of the Southern Province. After thinking this, he tightly clenched his fists, started looking towards the sky and began shouting. He asked the director if he was watching him, and requested to contact the responsible individuals from the top 10 educational institutions and prepare for his admission. At the same time, in the surveillance room where Director Bai and the director of number 1 middle school were observing the students, they heard Hongwu but didn't pay him any attention as they were busy watching Lu Fan's dragon. While Director Bai was stroking his beard with his hand and looking at Lu Fan through the television, he explained to him that level 50 of the Celestial Tower was the most difficult since all the students who had ranked first in previous year exams had struggled to clear this level. The director of number 1 middle school crossed his arms, turned his head towards the television and explained to him that this level was decisive, since if even Lu Fan cleared this level, his speed of ascending in the Celestial Tower afterwards would not be very fast. At the same time, Lu Fan reached level 50 of the Nightmare Trial, which was a snowy mountain. While he and Xiaoyu were walking in the area, a system window appeared to inform him that Xiaoyu had obtained a new ability called Transformation. Upon seeing the system window, he quickly realized that this was the new ability Xiaoyu had obtained after leveling up. Without hesitation, Lu Fan touched the system window, causing Xiaoyu's skill status window to appear. She had 4 transformations, the original being the Giant Dragon. The first transformation was called Young Dragon, in which all her attributes and energy consumption were reduced by 50%. The second transformation was called Dragon Woman. She could only activate this form by signing a contract with a dragon tamer. The third transformation was called Destruction Dragon. Xiaoyu's strength decreased by 50%, and her spirit increased by 100%. granting her new abilities called Burn Everything and Lava Explosion. The fourth transformation was called World Destroyer. Her stamina decreased by 50% and her strength increased by 100%, giving her new abilities called Tear the Earth Apart and Roar of Terror. While Lu Fan was checking Xiaoya's status window, the ground started shaking. Upon seeing this, he was somewhat surprised and began to wonder what was happening. Xiaoya turned her head to the side and realized that something bad was about to happen. At that moment, the rocks that were near them began to fly and come together until several seconds later, a monster made of rocks appeared. Although Xiaoya was giant, this monster was even bigger than her. This monster was called Purple-Eyed Mountain Giant and it was level 20. It had several unique abilities. The first ability was called the Fist of the Mountains, which allowed it to swing its rock arm to sweep all targets in front of it, causing a great amount of damage. The second ability was called Mountain Earthquake. This ability allowed the monster to gather momentum and make a big jump, repeatedly hitting the ground, causing a great amount of damage accompanied by 5 earthquakes. The third and final ability was called Purple Stone. The monster could create a magical barrier that reduced the damage received by 50%, making it immune to armor penetration effects. Upon seeing the Nightmare Trial monster, Director Bai was shocked and began to wonder how Lu Fan would face it. The director of No. 1 Middle School simply sighed and reminded him once again that level 50 was going to be decisive as it would slow down the speed at which Lu Fan was ascending the Celestial Tower. He turned his head towards the leaderboard and was shocked to see that Lu Fan was in first place with 3.2 million points. With this score, the No. 1 position in the city of Zhanghai was already secured for Lu Fan. The director knew that it was very likely that he would also end up being the No. 1 in the entire southern province. He didn't know how it was possible that a student with so much potential wasn't from the first middle school. At the same time, on the level 50 of the Nightmare Trial, the monster began to stare at Lu Fan and roar. While he was checking the monster's status window, it activated the skill called Mountain Fist, which allowed it to swing its rocky arm to sweep all targets in front of it, causing a great amount of damage. Lu Fan thought about the damage reduction effect. Now that he had reached the halfway point of the Celestial Tower in the trial, the difficulty had increased compared to before. The monster began to quickly bring its fist closer to Lu Fan, with the intention of attacking. While little by little the fist of the monster was getting closer, Lu Fan simply started to smile. Just before the monster's fist could reach and impact Lu Fan, Xiaoya appeared and hit the monster's fist with her own fist, blocking the attack in the process. Lu Fan simply put his hands in his pockets and, upon seeing that things had reached this point, he called Xiaoya's attention and gave her the order to transform into the form of World Destroyer. Upon hearing the order, she began to roar to indicate that she understood. At that moment, a red energy appeared around her body and she grew enormous. Gaining momentum, she began to fly, forcefully pushing the monster backwards. Seeing this, Director Bai was surprised and started wondering what Lu Fan had planned to do. Little by little, Xiaoya began to transform. A powerful black armor appeared around her claw along with a pink flame. Then her wings transformed into flames. Several seconds later, she completely changed shape. Now her body was covered in black armor. She started flying and as she approached the monster, she began to roar. A system window appeared to inform Lu Fan that the transformation had been completed. Now she was in the form of the black dragon called World Destroyer. Her strength had increased from 1,456 points to 2,912, while her spirit had decreased from 1,424 points to 712. Agility and stamina remained the same. Now that she had transformed, she unlocked 2 new abilities called Earthbreak and Roar of the Apocalypse. Upon seeing that Lu Fan's dragon could transform and become even more efficient in combat, Director Bai, Shanghai, and the director of the first middle school were shocked. While Shanghai was looking at Lu Fan with a surprised look, he started sweating and told them that transformations like this gave him goosebumps. While Lu Fan was distracted, the monster tried to attack him from behind using its fist, but luckily, he noticed the attack and with a burst of momentum, he jumped, dodging the attack in the process. This caused the monster's fist to hit the ground and shatter into pieces. Upon seeing that Lu Fan had evaded the attack, the monster began staring at him with a murderous gaze. Lu Fan used the skill called Dragon's Inspiration, which inspired himself and the dragon pet, increasing all attributes and attack power by 30%. While Lu Fan's eye was emitting a powerful flame, he turned his head towards the monster and with a smile called Xiaoya. Thanks to Lu Fan using the Dragon's Inspiration ability, Her strength increased from 2,912 points to 3,785. Her spirit increased from 712 points to 925. Her agility increased from 1,104 points to 1,435. And her stamina increased from 1,503 points to 1,953. While Lu Fan's hand was emitting a powerful flame, he extended his hand towards the monster and ordered Xiaoyu to use the giant jaw attack, which allowed her to increase her speed and take a bite at the target, inflicting continuous bleeding damage. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyu appeared and took a strong bite out of the rock monster, breaking its body into pieces. Upon seeing this, the director of the first middle school was shocked and began to wonder if a level 20 boss had really been defeated with just one bite. Director Bai turned his head towards the television and with a serious look, he realized that if Lu Fan was able to break the defense of the purple-eye giant from the mountains, surely Xiaoyu's attack power exceeded 2,000 points. While Lu Fan was in the air, the monster reassembled its body and tried to catch him using its hand. Luckily, he reacted in time and by moving his body to the side, he dodged the attack. While still in midair, he turned his body towards the monster, and while staring at it intently, he used Xiaoyu's power causing a black armor to appear around his hand. His hand transformed into a claw. He launched a powerful attack towards the monster, destroying it into pieces and creating a big explosion in the process. The ability that Lu Fan had used was called Dragon's Claw, which transformed the user's arm into a dragon claw. Its power depended on the black dragon. Upon seeing Lu Fan's ability, Kang Shang was amazed. Shanhai turned his head towards him and asked if he now realized why he had prevented him from taking Lu Fan. While Lu Fan was in the air, another monster appeared and started approaching him quickly. He simply turned his head towards it, extended his hand to the side, and activated the Dragon Claw again. While Xiaoyu was fighting against another monster, she noticed that Lu Fan was in danger. She lifted her head and, while looking at the monster, let out a powerful roar, causing its body to be thrown backwards. She had used the Roar of the Apocalypse. This ability allowed her to emit a loud roar towards the target, inflicting a great amount of damage to all targets within range and applying the vulnerability effect. Lu Fan turned his head slightly towards the monster and with a determined smile, he decided it was time to deliver the final blow. At that moment, Xiaoyu appeared behind him and began staring at the monster with a murderous look, leaving Lu Fan surprised. Lu Fan used the ability called the Earth Breaks. This ability allowed Xiaoyu to forcefully strike the ground, causing great damage to all targets reached by the shockwave, creating abyssal cracks in the process. The enemy targets had a chance of falling into the created abyssal cracks. She spread her wings to the sides and forcefully struck the ground, breaking it into pieces and creating an abyssal crack. The Nightmare Trial boss fell into the crack, where it would be unable to escape from. Now that they had defeated the boss, her level increased to 12 and Lu Fan's level increased to 17. Now that both had leveled up, Lu Fan thought choosing the Nightmare Trial had been the right choice. He turned his head to one side and with a smile, he thought that not only did he have no obstacles in terms of difficulty, but every time he advanced to the next level, he leveled up and his experience improved greatly. Now that Lu Fan had successfully cleared level 50, a portal appeared. Without thinking twice, Lu Fan and Xiaoyu began to move towards the portal. At the same time, in the surveillance room, Shanhai put out his cigarette, then turned his head slightly towards the director of the first middle school, and told him that the so-called decisive level 50 posed no problem for Lu Fan. He simply crossed his arms, closed his eyes and replied that Lu Fan's powerful dragon was simply far beyond his understanding. Upon hearing this, Director Bai turned his head towards Kang Shang, as he had extensive knowledge about dragons. The director asked him if he could perceive how strong Lu Fan's dragon had become after changing form. Kang Shang placed his hand under his chin and explained that he had witnessed some important individuals fighting in the dragon realm. Comparing the strength of Lu Fan's dragon with those dragons, he revealed to everyone that Lu Fan's dragon had a strength of at least 2,500 points. Upon hearing this, the principal of the first middle school was shocked. He began to stare at Kang Shang and told the others that 25 points were too much. He asked if their level and attributes were not worthy of mention. Principal Bai simply listened in silence, then raised his head and while staring at Lu Fan through the screen, he thought he was right. He was afraid that Lu Fan's attributes would continue to increase instead of decrease. While the director of the first middle school stood with crossed arms, he closed his eyes and told the others that since Lu Fan had reached level 50, the pattern of X+1 would also become increasingly evident. Upon hearing this, Shanhai turned his head back and asked what the X+1 pattern was. While Director Bai was watching the television, he told the others that there was no doubt since the X+1 pattern had been designed by scholars as an initial test for the Celestial Tower. He explained to everyone that after students pass floor 50, every time they pass through X levels with a large number of normal monsters, they would encounter a higher level boss. What made the test more similar to a real dungeon, where one was constantly in danger of losing their life. With a serious look, he revealed to everyone that in the nightmare trial of the Celestial Tower, this was different because all the monsters were going to be replaced by a nightmare difficulty boss. Shanhai took a cigarette out of the box, put it in his mouth, and while he was lighting it up, Director Bai approached them, extended his hand, and explained that in the nightmare trial, Lu Fan would not only encounter a boss, but also its attributes would increase dramatically. Kang Shong turned his head towards Director Bai and with a serious look, simply stayed silent without interrupting. While Shanhai was holding the cigarette in his hand, he turned his head towards them, exhaled the smoke from his lungs, and with a smile asked them to look at Lu Fan. At the same time in the nightmare trial, Lu Fan unsheathed the dagger and, gaining momentum, took a big leap. In front of him appeared a dinosaur-shaped monster that was trying to attack him by surprise. But to its bad luck, Lu Fan was already aware that he couldn't let his guard down in a place like this. Just before it could make a move, Lu Fan cut the poor monster into pieces with the precision of a surgeon, without giving it a chance to react. After finishing off the monster, Lu Fan landed on the ground, letting Shanhai and the others know that he didn't need to be thinking about things like X+1. Xiao Yi appeared and using her sharp teeth, she grabbed the lifeless head of the monster with her mouth. At that moment, several system windows appeared. Now that the monster had been defeated, the level 70 of the nightmare trial had been successfully cleared. As a result, Lu Fan's level increased to 17 and his dragon pet's level increased to 18. While Lu Fan's eyes were emitting flames, he began to look sideways, and there was no doubt in his mind that after floor 50, the Celestial Tower was designed to become increasingly difficult. However, with the World Destroyer, Xiao Yi by his side, this trial was not going to pose any problem for him. Lu Fan decided to continue leveling up, so he started walking. While holding the dagger in one hand, he began wiping his mouth with the other and with a smile, gave Xiao Yi the order to follow him. Using her sharp teeth, she split the monster's neck in two and began to roar to indicate to Lu Fan that she had understood. At the same time, in the surveillance room, the Director Bai, who had his arms behind his back and was observing Lu Fan, explained to the director of First Middle School that only about 10 minutes had passed and Lu Fan had already reached the floor 70 of the Nightmare Trial, the most difficult trial of all. The director of the First Middle School, who was sitting with his arms crossed, closed his eyes and explained to him that this year's trials of the Celestial Tower were more difficult compared to previous years. He opened one of his eyes and began to glance at the screen, and then he explained to the Director Bai that he really doubted that anyone would be able to surpass the 80th floor of the tower this year. He had spoken too soon, as Lu Fan arrived on the 76th floor. Upon seeing that Lu Fan was cleaning the floors of the tower without much difficulty, the director of First Middle School realized that he had been simplistic in his thinking. At the same time, Xiao Yi and Lu Fan reached the 76th floor of Nightmare Trial, where several elk-shaped monsters appeared and tried to attack them. However, it was in vain as Xiao Yi started spitting fire and eliminated them effortlessly, thus successfully clearing the 76th floor. Once they reached the next floor, a giant carnivorous worm with thousands of teeth emerged from the ground, opened its gigantic mouth, and began to roar. As it slowly approached, Lu Fan simply stood still. Then, he extended both hands towards it, causing flames to appear. He began to stare at the monster with a murderous look and summoned Xiao Yi. Lu Fan unleashed a powerful flame towards the worm, splitting its body in half. In an instant, she appeared out of nowhere and using her sharp claw, she ripped off its head. While holding onto its head, she began to stare at it intently and roar. Now that the monster was dead, the level 83 of the Nightmare Trial was cleared. As a result, Xiao Yi the Dragoness leveled up to 14 and Lu Fan leveled up to 19. Director Bai turned his back to the screen, put his hands behind his back, and as he was approaching Shanhai, he revealed to everyone that in previous years many geniuses had been constantly striving to reach the highest floor of the tower. As a result, all they had achieved was exhausting their strength and losing their lives. Shanhai put the cigarette in his mouth, put his hand in his pocket, closed his eyes and asked the director to reflect on it since Lu Fan was on the 80th floor, which meant that he only needed to clean a couple more floors to obtain the final reward of the grand exam. He knew that the director wanted Lu Fan to come back. He questioned him if he really believed that someone like Lu Fan would give up so easily. Director Bai reached out towards the leaderboard. Lu Fan was in first place with 6.5 million points, far surpassing the others. Director Bai told Shanghai and the others that he wasn't trying to bring Lu Fan back, but quite the opposite. He wanted him to continue challenging the Celestial Tower since it was very likely that he would be the only candidate in the last 10 who would be able to surpass the 100th floor. The director of the first middle school, who was sitting with his arms crossed, opened one eye and while glancing at the screen, asked Director Bai to wait a moment. Although the bosses on each floor were not as powerful as the bosses of the secret dungeons, they couldn't forget that the difficulty of the 99th floor was very high. At that moment, a teacher sitting next to him caught everyone's attention. He began pointing at the screen and asked everyone to look because Lu Fan had reached the 99th floor. Upon hearing this, the director of the first middle school opened his eyes, and upon seeing that Lu Fan had indeed reached the 99th floor, he was shocked and began to wonder how this was possible. The 99th floor of the Nightmare Trial was a castle. While holding the dagger with one hand, Lu Fan put his other hand in his pants pocket and started walking down the hallway. Several seconds later, he reached the end of the hallway. In front of him were some stairs leading up to a throne, next to which stood several armed knights. As he approached a little closer, he saw that they were not knights but simply suits of armor. At that moment, the candles lit up by magic, and soon a strong wind began to blow towards the direction where the armors were. Lu Fan simply stood still and started staring at the armors, knowing that something bad was about to happen. At that moment, blue flames appeared on the armors, causing them to slowly come to life. A status window about these monsters appeared. They were the level 55 Headless Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Each of the lifeless knights had a unique ability. The Spear Knight had the skill called Thrusts. This skill allowed the knight to throw between 4 to 8 thrusts. If one of the attacks hit the target, then the thrust effect would be added, inflicting an additional damage of 400%. The knight with the sword had a skill called Counterattack. When it received damage, it could activate a powerful counterattack. The knight with 2 swords had a skill called Thunder. This ability allowed it to activate the power of thunder, increasing its attack speed and granting additional damage. The knight with the giant axe had a skill called Execution. If its health was below 75%, it could attack the target and kill it in one blow. The last skill was a joint skill called Knight's Oath. This skill allowed the knights to merge their health points and defense, increasing them by 400%. Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger, extended his hand towards the monsters, assumed an offensive stance, and with a serious look he remembered that the Headless Horsemen of the Apocalypse came from a very famous secret dungeon. All secret dungeons had originated in the real world, a clear example being the Kingdom of Destruction, which was created as a result of the invasion of the undead army hundreds of years ago, where the king was killed. The knight wielding the axe used the skill Execution and struck the ground with force, breaking it into pieces. Lu Fan began to cover his face with his arm and thought about the knight's ability called Knight's Oath, which allowed them to merge their HP points. He decided that the safest method to defeat these monsters was to distract them and attack them one by one. He gathered momentum and started moving quickly towards the monsters. Since he didn't possess any distraction skills, he could only confront them in one way. Gaining momentum, Lu Fan took a big leap and decided to fight against the 4 together, taking advantage of being in the air. The Spear Knight used the skill Thrust and began attacking Lu Fan with a series of thrusts. But Lu Fan effortlessly blocked the attacks using his dagger. At that moment, one of the knights let down their guard. It didn't take long for Lu Fan to notice this, and without wasting a second, he attacked the knight, cutting its body in half. Several seconds later, thanks to the power of blue flames, the knight's body rejoined. Lu Fan turned his head back, and upon seeing that the knight's body had reassembled itself, he realized that he couldn't defeat them using only his dagger. The knight that Lu Fan had attacked was the knight who wielded a sword, and it possessed the ability to counterattack. Now that the conditions of the ability had been fulfilled, it stood up and prepared to counterattack Lu Fan with a powerful strike. Upon realizing this, Lu Fan's expression changed drastically as he knew he was in danger. The knight attacked Lu Fan, but he reacted in time and effortlessly blocked the attack using his dagger. While he was blocking the knight's attack, he gave Xiaoyi the order to attack. At that moment, she appeared and struck the knights with great force, shattering the floor in pieces in the process. Before her attack could land, Lu Fan gained momentum, leaped, and moved away from the area. Then, she attacked the knights by unleashing a powerful flame, destroying part of the castle into pieces and creating a curtain of smoke in the process. Several seconds later, as the smoke began to dissipate, Lu Fan praised Xiaoyi for doing a good job. While she had her hand resting on the castle wall, she turned her head towards where the knights were and started roaring. At that moment, the knight wielding two swords emerged from the rubble and activated the thunder ability, which allowed it to increase its attack speed and add additional thunder damage. The knight extended its swords to the sides and began shouting. In the blink of an eye, it appeared next to Lu Fan and attacked him. But using the dagger, Lu Fan blocked the attack. While he was distracted blocking the knight's attack, the three knights emerged from the rubble and, gaining momentum, took a big leap and began to advance quickly towards him. The knight with the giant axe attacked Lu Fan, but he took a big leap and dodged the attack at the last second, causing its axe to hit the ground. While he was in the air, he started looking at the knights and decided not to waste any more time as he had to reach the 100th floor as quickly as possible. With a serious look, he extended his hand towards the knights and ordered Xiaoyi to prepare for an attack. Upon hearing the order, she appeared behind him, opened her mouth, and began summoning a large fireball. She was using the skill called Lava Flame, which allowed her to continuously shoot flames forward, causing damage and healing herself at the same time. Xiaoyi launched the fireball towards the knights, destroying the castle into pieces. Xiaoyi began to unleash a powerful flame towards the knights, who quickly realized that this attack was very strong. So they used their last ability, a joint skill called Knight's Oath, which allowed them to merge their health points in defense, increasing them by 400%. They tried to resist, but it was in vain. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyi's powerful flame destroyed them, burning them until they turned into ashes. While the corpses of the knights were burning, with a murderous look, Xiaoyi began to stare at them intently. In order not to be burned by Xiaoyi's attack, Lu Fan created a barrier around himself. Now that the knights were dead, floor 99 was successfully cleaned, and thus, Lu Fan reached level 20 and Xiaoyi reached level 15, and she also obtained a new ability called Great Cataclysm. While he was holding the dagger with one hand, he extended the other towards the system window, and with a smile thought it wasn't strange that Xiaoyi had obtained a new ability after leveling up. Now they only had to clean the last floor of the tower. At the same time, in the surveillance room, the director of First Middle School approached the screen and, upon seeing Lu Fan, he was amazed. He explained to the others that the portal on the top floor of Nightmare Trial had opened. Upon hearing this, Shanhai also approached and was left speechless. Shanhai quickly set aside his emotions, put his cigarette back in his mouth, turned his head slightly towards the others, and with a smile told them that today they were going to witness something historic. Director Bai stood up, began to look at Lu Fan with a surprised expression, and asked the others what kind of monsters were going to appear on the 100th floor. At the same time, while the entire castle was burning, Lu Fan approached the king's throne and saw that there was a sword stuck in it. While holding the dagger with one hand, he grabbed the sword with the other, put his foot on the throne, and began to exert force to pull out the sword. Upon seeing this, Director Bai quickly realized what was about to happen. He revealed to the others that it was simply that the tower did not want the students to pass the trial. With a serious look, Lu Fan began to stare at the sword, then he grabbed the handle and with force pulled it out of the throne. Once he pulled the sword out of the throne, it disappeared and the entire castle was engulfed in a red flame. Upon witnessing this, Lu Fan became somewhat confused and began to wonder what was happening. Meanwhile, on the other side, Xiaoyi simply sat behind him and remained silent, ready to face any new monster that appeared. Lu Fan knew something was not right. As he turned his head to the side, he saw that the sword was surrounded by a powerful energy. Then, slowly but surely, the sword started to disintegrate and return to the throne. Little by little, he began to turn his head to one side, and with a serious look, he thought that this was the 100th floor. The throne that had been previously destroyed by Xiaoyi reappeared. And not only that, but the king also appeared, who was sitting on its throne and holding its sword. The knights they had just defeated also appeared, and not only that, but hundreds of undead soldiers also appeared on the ground. This was the 100th floor of the Nightmare Trial. Lu Fan turned his body towards them, began to stare at the king, and thought that they had to clean up this secret realm called Broken Kingdom to pass the Nightmare Trial. The king, who was sitting on its throne, began to summon more undead soldiers, who unsheathed their swords and with a murderous look started staring at Lu Fan. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform him that the number of undead soldiers exceeded 500. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan quickly realized that this was the king's complete army. The king wore a hood and powerful armor with a heavy sword as its weapon. The king's stat window appeared. It was the Emperor of Destruction, level 60, and the boss of the Nightmare Trial. Lu Fan thought that Xiaoya had never transformed into her world destroyer form. Xiaoya's skill window appeared. She had obtained a new skill called Great Cataclysm. This skill was damage-based and had 3 stages. Xiaoya could launch fire bombs throughout the flying zone, causing a significant amount of damage and applying burns. Upon completion, she would dive down towards the target area to inflict a large amount of damage and detonate the burned area once again. Lu Fan opened Xiaoya's skill window, and as he scrolled through the interface using his finger, he thought it was time to witness her Dragon of Destruction form and her new abilities. He reached out to the side and closed the system window, then started looking at the boss, and with a smile he asked Xiaoya to do her best because he wanted to clear the last floor of the tower and obtain the reward from the grand exam. Upon hearing this, Xiaoya stood up, began to stare at the boss, and started roaring to indicate to Lu Fan that she was ready. He unsheathed the dagger, began pointing it at the king, and ordered Xiaoya to transform into the Dragon of Destruction. Upon hearing his command, Xiaoya started staring at the boss with a murderous look and began roaring. Then, she extended her hands to the sides and began to transform, causing her body to be engulfed in flames. First, her wings changed and became much larger, and then her body. Now she was much bigger and more powerful than before. While her body was surrounded by flames, she extended her hands to the sides and started looking at the boss. This transformation, called Dragon of Destruction, was of legendary quality. In this form, she had a strength of 1484 points, an agility of 2055, a spirit of 7202, and a resistance of 2903 points. Since she had transformed for the first time, the system granted her 2 new abilities as rewards. The first one was called Annihilation of Everything, and the second one was called Lava Explosion. Director Bai started to look at the screen, and when he saw her new transformation, he was speechless because he couldn't believe that she had a third transformation. While Shanghai was holding the cigarette in his hand, he slightly turned his head back and was somewhat amazed to see the blazing flames. He realized that Lu Fan had an ace up his sleeve. The boss stood up, began pointing its sword at Lu Fan, and gave the order for the entire army to attack and protect the king. Upon hearing the boss's order, over 500 undead soldiers unsheathed their swords and, with a murderous look in their eyes, began to advance towards Lu Fan. Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger and, gaining momentum, started moving quickly towards them. He looked at the boss and with a smile asked Xiaoya to prepare for the challenge. He was ready to fight against the entire army of undead from the fragmented kingdom. She didn't stay behind, and also gaining momentum, she started to fly and follow him. While Xiaoya was flying and heading towards the boss, the undead soldiers also gained momentum and began attacking Lu Fan. But they were no match for him, so he started defending himself effortlessly using the dagger. While he was fighting against the undead soldiers, he started to look up at the sky, and with a shout, he gave Xiaoya the order to use the ability Great Catastrophe. She obeyed him and used the ability. Once she activated it, her eyes began to emit powerful and suffocating flames. The ground slowly started to crack, and several seconds later, a huge explosion occurred, killing many undead soldiers. Then, she started flying around the area and began throwing powerful flames towards them. In the blink of an eye, she killed more than half of the king's army, leaving only 173 undead soldiers. This ability allowed her to create explosions in the area she flew over, causing a great amount of damage and inflicting burns. Upon seeing how powerful she was, everyone was in shock. The director of the first middle school was left speechless and asked the others if this really was an ability that students could master. Shanghai was shocked and amazed. He couldn't believe that the army of undead soldiers had been almost annihilated in the blink of an eye. Director Bai was so paralyzed by what he was seeing that he didn't say a single word. While Xiaoya was eliminating the undead soldiers, Lu Fan gained momentum and began to quickly advance towards the king's throne. Now there were only 42 undead soldiers left. The undead knights were not going to allow Lu Fan to approach the king, so they took a leap, unsheathed their weapons, and prepared to attack. The knights attacked Lu Fan, ordering him to kneel before their king, but he simply jumped aside and effortlessly dodged the attack, causing the knights to crash into the ground. Lu Fan knew that being alone he wouldn't be able to face the knights, so he turned his head to one side and with a shout called Zioya, giving her the order to come to him. Upon hearing his command, she began to descend rapidly towards the knights. With a murderous look, she prepared to use the second stage of her ability, which allowed her to dive towards the targets and cause a great amount of damage. She descended upon the knights, then spread her hands to the sides and used the third stage of her ability, which allowed her to land near the target and then detonate a flame bomb. By doing this, her body began to emit intense flames. Director Bai was shocked as he couldn't believe that the 4 knights had been killed in an instant. Shanhai slightly turned his head towards the screen, and with a confused look, began to wonder if it was possible to test Lu Fan's true power even in the most difficult trial. The director of the first middle school caught everyone's attention. He crossed his arms, started looking at the leaderboard, and revealed to everyone that Lu Fan had 999,000 points, a score that hadn't been surpassed in 30 years. He started questioning whether Lu Fan would be able to obtain the reward from the grand exam. Director Bai also approached him, and while he was stroking his beard, he began to look at the leaderboard and explained to them that this year's exam was the most difficult, so the rewards and qualities of the items were going to be very good. At the same time, Lu Fan finished off the undead knights, extended his dagger to one side, and while his body was surrounded by intense flames, he began walking towards the king. He stared at it intently, and now that he had eliminated all of the subjects, he decided it was time to eliminate the final boss. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.